So I serve as the personal ministries director for the Washington Conference, but since I'm going to be your presenter this week, and I thought maybe I should take a few minutes just so you guys can get to know me a little bit, all right? So I am born and raised in California, even though I live in Washington. Born in Long Beach, grew up in the Inland Empire, right? 909, any 909 people? Some of you know what I'm talking about there. I grew up literally like a mile from La Sierra University, right off of La Sierra. Now, my parents are divorced. My dad lived like a mile from Loma Linda. And even though there's more Adventists than people in these areas, I never met an Adventist until I met my wife. I spent 5 years, I was in the military, I was in an air squadron, and I was connected to 3 different aircraft carriers. I did 2 tours in the Persian Gulf on aircraft carriers. I met my wife, we get married, I'm 22 years old. I did not grow up in an Adventist home. I was baptized at 23, attending an evangelistic seminar. I was the only person baptized, Mr. President. Can you imagine that? I feel sorry for that church board, all that work they put in, and one person got baptized. Well, I got to remember this computer now. I'm using Justin Kim's computer, and he told me that if I use a Mac, my presentation automatically gets like 10 times better. But it's not a touch screen, is it? It's not locked up, but how do I do the, don't show too. Oh, like this. Yes. Oh, look at that. Oh, man, I've heard so many good things of Justin Kim. Beautiful. So I get out of the military, and at 24, I spent a couple of years working for the Northern California Conference as a Bible worker. And then I was picked up by just this little small ministry most people have never heard of called Amazing Facts. I spent 10 years as an evangelist, and I was also teaching in their AVCO program, personal and public evangelism and Bible doctrines. I've spent the last 10 years with the Washington Conference, the last 6 years as the personal ministries director. In my ministry, as I've had a chance to serve the Lord, and I've preached over 100 full-length evangelistic meetings. In the last 6 years, I've also served as church planting director, and by God's grace, we've planted 18 churches in the last 6 years, representing 7 different language groups. Then in the last 3 years, we've taken about 10 churches on a journey through church revitalization. So what I'm going to share with you this weekend are things that we're doing. Now, as far as my background in education goes, I've got a master's degree in business administration and a master's degree in marriage and family therapy. And so if you can see tonight's title, Mental Health and Evangelism, you pastors and ministry leaders tonight, you're all going to receive free therapy tonight. Do you need therapy in ministry? You do, right? Absolutely. So tonight we're going to talk about mental health. Now, I realize that my story is probably more intriguing to me than it is to you, but I wanted to hear it one more time, so I thought I would just share it with you guys here tonight. So tonight we're going to talk about mental health. Now, how do I do this? There we go. Now, what is mental health? Now, mental health is defined as a state of well-being in which every individual realizes his or her own potential, can cope with the normal stresses of life. Does ministry bring stress, yes or no? Yes. Stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. Now, when it comes to mental health, we're all on the spectrum of mental health. And depending on where you're at in your ministry, you're going to move up and down that spectrum depending on what's happening in your church. A few years ago, I was doing an evangelistic series at one of our churches, and after the seminar, like most evangelists, you go out and you kind of, you work the audience, you talk to the guest, and a lady was there, and she looked like she was about to cry, so I walked up and I said, "Hey, what's going on?" And she said, long story short, she said, "I struggle with anxiety." I said, "Tell me about it." She began to explain her challenges, and she knew that I have a thing for mental health, and I like to help people. And she said, my mom told me the reason I struggle with anxiety is because I don't pray hard enough and I don't trust God enough. And I said, with all due respect, your mom is not accurate. You see, I want to start off tonight by sharing a couple of things. Number one, it's okay to have Jesus and a therapist. Did you hear me? It's okay to have Jesus and a therapist. This Monday, 1 p.m., I get to meet with my buddy Kyle. He's my therapist because we need this in ministry. And number two, it's okay to have Jesus, a therapist, and take medication when needed. Are you hearing what I'm picking up, yes or no? So I'm hoping this presentation really lands with some of you because this is the presentation that God placed upon my heart. Do you realize that according to the World Health Organization, 32% of adults struggle with anxiety and or depression? And so I want you to think about that. If you knew that a third of those attending your church struggle with anxiety or depression, what would your church do differently? If you're a pastor, what would your sermonic calendar look like? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to visualize your church. I know some of you are pastors, church leaders, elders, and when you stand in your pulpit Sabbath morning and you look out over your church, I want you to visualize, use your mental eye, visualize your church. And if it's like most churches, you probably have 6 to 8 people per pew, per row, I should say. That means on average, 2 to 3 of those individuals Sabbath morning in the last year have struggled with both anxiety and depression. 1/3. I look at the audience here tonight and I see there are 3 sections. Doing the math, I would say, I won't pick out a section, but one of these sections, if we were to rotate you guys around, is struggling today with anxiety and depression. The World Health Organization shared that during the pandemic, this is a heartbreaking statistic, but 1/4 of 18 to 24-year-olds seriously considered suicide in the last month. And I tell you, if you're a person of faith, you are not immune from anxiety or depression. And more importantly, I want you to know tonight that God has not abandoned you. There is no reason why the church should not address such an important topic. I mean, God does. I don't have to give you too much background because you understand this, but you look at Hebrews chapter 11. We call that the Hall of... And you read about the men and women that are listed there, and you read about their stories and the trauma that was passed down generationally. And you read their highs and their lows and their struggles and their family dysfunction. And yet, despite all of that, God was able to use them. And they're mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11. I love what the Bible says here in Psalms chapter 69. And this, of course, is David, the one who faced the giant. David, the men among boys. He describes his experience and he says, I am weary with my crying. My throat is dry. My eyes fail while I wait for my God. This is David we're talking about. This is David who had a heart after the Lord. He says, look, I'm struggling. I'm struggling with my mental health. And not just David, but I think of the prophet Elijah. He tells us in 1 Kings 19:4, he says, it is enough now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my father. And by the way, this depression happens right after his Mount Carmel experience. Right after God literally brought fire down from heaven. I mean, what a miracle. And Elijah says, man, it'd be better if I was just dead. And yet, if you know the story, Elijah has a happy ending. God speaks to Elijah and reminds him that his life has a purpose. You see, when Elijah felt like he was all alone, God reminds him, no, you're not all alone. I'm still here with you. And we can take comfort in this because there are going to come moments in ministry. And The longer you serve in ministry, you know about these moments. You know about those sleepless nights. And if you're honest with yourself, you know there's been times you've sat in the bottom of the shower where the water's just about as hot as you can take it, and tears are coming down your cheeks, and you're wondering, can I go another week? I got to write a sermon for this coming Sabbath, and man, I just don't feel like it. Have you been there before? I love this quote from 2 Testimonies. Ellen White says, every follower of Christ should daily examine himself that he may become perfectly acquainted with his own conduct. There is with nearly all a neglect of, what does she say? Self-examination. She tells us we need to have self-examination. We need to be acquainted with ourselves. In fact, she goes on. She says this neglect is positively dangerous in one who professes to be a mouthpiece for God, occupying the fearful, responsible position of receiving the words from God to give to his people. Should pastors, should church leaders take their mental health seriously? Ellen White says that we should have self-examination. So let me ask you, can you be all in for Jesus and still live a balanced life? You know, studies show that people who love their work are 4 times more resilient. You see, this weekend's supposed to be about evangelism. We're going to talk about evangelism, yet here I am talking about mental health. And why is that? The reason is this. If you want to be an effective soul winner, you've got to take your mental health seriously. Is that a true statement, yes or no? If you want to be an effective soul winner, you've got to take your mental health seriously. I love this quote here from the now deceased motivational speaker, Jim Rohn. He says, I will take care of me for you if you will take care of you for me. How many of you are sitting next to your spouse? All right. How many of you are sitting next to somebody you know? All right. You know, let's just do this. Turn to the person next to you, whether you're left or you're right, and look in their eyes, right? And say to them, I will take care of me for you if you will take care of you for me. If you're married, say that to your wife, and then your spouse has to say it back, right? And here's the reason I say this. Let me tell you, in ministry, when you take care of you, you take care of your family. In ministry, when you take care of you, you take care of your church. When you take care of you, you become more effective as a tool in God's hands. Do you believe that's true? Absolutely. I love this, what Peter Drucker, organizational guru, says. He says, the 4 most difficult jobs in America are, in no particular order, president of the U.S., or president of a conference, right? Sure. University president, hospital CEO, and pastor. Do I have to convince you, pastors, that you have one of the most difficult jobs in North America? And if you're not a pastor, but you're here with your pastor tonight, I want you to understand this quote, that your pastor has one of the most challenging jobs. You see, as Adventists, we like to brag about our health message. We have the only blue zone in North America, Loma Linda, right? I mean, we love the health message. Praise God for the health message. Because on average, like Adventists, what is it? We live like 7 to 10 years longer than the rest of the population. You know, that's true for the general population, or for the general, typical Adventist member. But I've been told that 7 to 10 years longevity does not apply to Adventist pastors. So what do pastors do when you feel overwhelmed? What do pastors do when you feel like you are burnt out? What do? Where do you go? You see, 9 years in the ministry, this would have been in 2009. I got to the point, and let me tell you the story I'm sharing tonight. My wife knows the story, but I've never shared this story publicly. You're the very first. 9 years in ministry, I was burnt out. I was done. Like, I just was spent. I had no more fuel in the tank. And I thought about leaving ministry. And I didn't just think about leaving ministry, I updated my resume. Now, I didn't do the normal route that I probably should have and, get an undergraduate in, religion or theology, get my MDiv. No, I went to business school. And so I updated my resume and I knew, hey, I've got an MBA. I've probably got a pretty good shot at getting a job out there in the corporate world. Now, I didn't have a desire to work in the corporate world. I probably would have been unhappy and miserable, but working in ministry, I was unhappy and I was miserable. And I thought, hey, if you're going to be unhappy and miserable, you might as well make 2 to 3 times the salary, right? I mean, it's a lot easier to be miserable and make 6 figures, wouldn't you agree? At least I could be miserable and drive a nicer car than a 10-year-old pickup truck. But then if you're old enough, you remember 2008, 2009, what happened to the economy? And companies weren't hiring on, what were they doing? They were laying people off, so my plan didn't work out. In so many professions, they allow the people to go home and not think about their work. But if you're in ministry, in our line of work, it's literally everywhere we go. In fact, notice this quote from the book Clergy Killers. It says, people in other vocations can at least escape into their religious faith when the pressure's on, but those in ministry must face the pressure with their work and faith wrapped together. Satan is a master when it comes to messing with our minds. In prophecy, we talk about the mark of the beast, and of course, we understand the whole issue of the seal of God, the mark of the beast, is right here in the frontal lobe, right? It's the mind. That's the issue. And Satan's the master of messing with the minds. He did it with a third of the angels and with Adam and Eve, and he does it with us today. Has he ever messed with your mind? I can remember growing up feeling like I was always a little bit different. I was a wild child. I grew up in Southern California, skateboarding, surfing, punk rocker, always in trouble. I was always the kid, they said, don't let your kids play with Tyler. He's a bad seed. The first time I got kicked out of school, I was in 5th grade. I thought it'd be fun to moon the bus. Apparently, they didn't think it was that funny. All through high school, got suspended every year in high school multiple times for fighting. It wasn't until I was an adult and I began to understand and realize what ADHD and OCD were. You see, I always felt a certain way inside, but I didn't really have the language to describe it. I've spent the last 10 or 15 years being very intentional about working on my own mental health, to make my mental health a priority. Because I know in God's hands, when I take care of me, I'm more effective in ministry. And don't misunderstand, I pray, I want to be filled with the Holy Spirit, but I also understand there's certain physical and mental things that people struggle with. And so I've got to be very proactive in my life. And so what do you do if you're at the end of your rope and you're struggling, and maybe my story resonates with you? Well, number one, you got to be honest and just know that you're not alone. I can almost guarantee you there are people in this room tonight that are connecting with what I'm sharing, and you're probably thinking, I cannot believe he's actually sharing that up front. There was a time in my life I never would have shared this in front of people. But I guess it's easier because I don't know all of you, and so it's like, a little bit easier. And we're not recording this, so it's a little easier. Or are we? Yeah. So number one, you've got to be honest with yourself and realize you're not alone. Number two, you've got to understand your why. What is that why? Because, they tell us you can withstand any how and accomplish any what if you know your why. What is that purpose, that thing inside you that says, yes, this is worth fighting for? So you got to be honest, you got to know your why, and you've got to be willing. You've got to be willing to be proactive. And to be proactive means you've got to talk to your primary care physician. And don't let pride get in the way. Don't let the idea, I'm a pastor, I should have it all together. Right? I write sermons every week. I've got an MDiv or a demon or whatever you might have. Don't let that be a stumbling block in your path. Be willing to talk to your primary care physician. They'll give you a little quiz. You fill out a little thing. It kind of rates you on your anxiety and depression. They can suggest a therapist or medication to kind of get you over the hump. In other words, take your mental health seriously, because when you take care of you, you take care of your church and you take care of your community. So what does unhealthy self-care look like? Because if you're not willing to take care of your self-care, here's what happens. This is what happens. Unrealistic expectations, role overload, lack of sleep and exercise. This is what unhealthy self-care looks like. No Sabbath. For some of us, Sunday, right? We talk about the mark of the beast, but let's be honest. Sunday becomes our Sabbath. I thank the Lord Jesus that the NFL's on Sundays and not Saturdays. I'm still working on college football, but maybe one of these days. Financial stress. What about an overt need to be praised in the pew? Imbalanced work alignment, lack of delegation. Are you making self-care a priority in your ministry? If you want to be an effective soul winner, if you want to be effective in ministry, for some people, not taking a vacation is seen as like a badge of honor. You ever read about James White, one of our pioneers? He was a workaholic, had 3 strokes, and he died at a young age compared to his wife. Think about if he understood better self-care, how much more God could have done through him if he had made self-care a priority. One pastor told me recently, he said he feels like he has 100 bosses and they all have a different job description. Have you felt that way in ministry? Well, what about healthy self-care? What does that look like? It looks like balance and boundary setting, personal time with God, clarity of purpose, sabbatical or at least vacation taking. I hope you're taking your vacation. Exercise and mental health. You see, I have to go to the gym 4 or 5 days a week. And it's not just because my wife demands rock hard abs. Still working on that. It's buried. It's just protective under a layer, but it's there somewhere. It's because studies show that exercise, and I appreciate my brother talking about breathing, exercise is highly beneficial when it comes to your mental health. So I'm tempted times to think, I've got so much to do today. My week is so busy. Do I have no, I need to go to the gym. I need to get on that treadmill. I need to get on that stair. I need to do those weights. And I can listen to a sermon and do other things during that time, but I need to make that a priority, because by taking care of me, I'm taking care of my church. By taking care of me, I'm taking care of my family. In the book Desire of Ages, Ellen White has an entire chapter titled, Come Rest a While. She talks about rest. And if I had to summarize that chapter, the reason she had the disciples go and rest is because the reason Jesus had them go rest is because he did not want them to get prideful, to think the success they were having was because of them. Make sure you read that chapter. It's a powerful chapter. Something else that pastors and those of us in ministry, even leaders in the church, what we suffer from is loneliness. You may have 1,000 friends on social media, but you can't find somebody to help you move your couch. Right? Have you been there before? I mean, is it possible to be at a pastor's meeting and feel all alone? You see, life is about relationships. Since the moment you were born, life is about relationships. And the quality of your life, and catch this, the quality of your ministry will depend on the quality of your relationships. I'll say that again. The quality of your life and the quality of your ministry is dependent upon the quality of your relationships. Harvard University did the longest study ever, started 80 years ago. Some of you probably use this as an illustration. If not, you can look it up, use it. The longest study ever done on what makes for a good life. Now, this is Harvard's study. They started off with a group of men, and then they studied later on when they got married, they studied their spouses, then their kids, descendants. Over 80 years this study's been going on. They have tracked and followed these people down through their life, generations. And then they realized what really makes for a good life, it all distilled, boils down to the quality of your relationships. The quality of your relationships. In fact, notice this from Forbes magazine. It says, scientists now warn that loneliness is worse for our health than obesity, smoking, lack of access to health care, and physical inactivity. You see, in ministry, it's easy sometimes to feel isolated. And I know that. As a pastor, it's easy to feel isolated, to feel like, do I have somebody to connect with, to talk with? I can't just pour everything out on my spouse. Do I have people in my life? Because after all, it's about relationships. Even if you've ever preached an evangelistic meeting or seen one, we've all used this illustration. We talk about the 10 commandments in the evangelistic meeting. We say the first 4 commandments are about our relationship between us and who? And the last 6 are about us and our... See, even the commandments are all about relationships. Yet in church, one of the reasons we're missing the mark is we're actually not very good at doing relationships well. I'm going to get into tomorrow morning and afternoon some more practical things tomorrow, but one of the things we'll look at tomorrow is the Natural Church Development Survey, and we'll kind of dig into that a little bit. But the NCD survey looks at 8 key areas of church health. Some of you are familiar with it. You know what I'm talking about. And the 8 key areas of church health, the 2 that we as Adventists are the absolute worst in. Number 1 is holistic small groups. And number 2, loving relationships. For whatever reason, Mr. President, we're just not so good at doing those relationships. Now, why is this important? Notice that quote again. Or notice the article. It talks about loneliness is worse than smoking. You see, in evangelistic meetings, we meet people. It's not as common now, more it's vaping now, but I'll just tie that into smoking. Is we have guests coming to our seminar, they're making decisions for Jesus and the 3 angels' message, and as an evangelist, we find out they smoke, and of course, we want to help them embrace the health message, and so we want to help them get off that tobacco. But then after that person is baptized, how well are we at helping them develop relationships in the church, right? Do we sometimes make the mistake we care more about getting off of cigarettes than building those relationships? Notice this from the book In the Village Effect. Susan Pinker says, our lack of meaningful social interaction and sense of displacement is not only heartbreaking, but astoundingly harmful to our way of life. It is literally killing us. Persistent loneliness alters the genes in every cell of our bodies, and not in a good way. You know, this is true in evangelistic meetings. As a church, during a seminar, we're really good at doing visitations. As an evangelist, I like to go out with pastors and do visitations, go out with the first elder, do visitations. And a common refrain I hear from folks is, they're coming to the seminar, they they're getting phone calls and text messages and visitations, and they say, man, this is great. I've only been going to your church for 2 or 3 weeks, and you have visited me more than my old church in the last 10 years. And all this love and attention is poured out, but then they get baptized. When we fall short at helping people after they're baptized, we're actually hurting their mental health. Let that sink in for just a moment. Does baptism mean a person's arrived, or does it mean they've just started? It means they're born again, right? We're actually affecting their negative, or we're negatively affecting their mental health. You know, when I started ministry, I was a workaholic. I was a Bible worker for the Northern California Conference. I started off in West Sacramento, then I moved on to Ukiah for a couple of years. And man, I thought I was the best Bible worker ever. I mean, I just loved being a Bible worker 7 days a week, 10-hour days, 12-hour days. Now, my wife, she got a job there in town, and she had Friday and Saturday off. And I would meet people that wanted Bible studies, and they would say, oh, I can only do it on Friday, or I can only do it on Saturday. And I knew that was the day my wife had off. But I thought, you know what? Nobody at the church can do it better than me. So I would schedule the Bible study. Arrogant, young ministry. And I was doing Bible studies 7 days a week. There were times 30, 40 Bible studies a week. And I was effective. I was effective as a Bible worker. But you know what? I almost lost my best friend and my wife over that. You see, in evangelistic meetings, we talk about the great controversy, but for some of us, the great controversy is being fought in the middle of our ministry marriage because we've neglected our first ministry. When I can't love the woman who climbs into my bed every night, something's wrong. In the first few years of my ministry, my marriage almost fell apart because I didn't have balance. Remember, you're going to pastor a lot of churches, but you're only going to have one family. I love this quote from the Search for Significance. It says, an articulate pastor speaks powerfully about the unconditional love and grace of God, yet he is plagued by guilt. He is driven to succeed in his public ministry, but is passive and withdrawn around his family. He has never understood how to apply his own teachings to his life and relationships. We're going to have many churches, but only one family. And so why is it when I'm with my family, I feel guilty for not working, but then when I'm working, I feel guilty for not being with my family? Have you ever felt that way before? I know this is something that many of us in ministry struggle with. And so here's what has helped me. When I work, and when I play, and I don't mix the two. Now, I'm not talking about not golfing with pastors, because I love to play some golf with my pastor buddies. But when I work, I pour it on. And when I play, I pour it on. When I work, I work. When I play. Here's what I'm talking about. There was a time, and I'm not perfect at this, so don't think this guy's got it all figured out, but I'm trying to be intentional, that I'll be at the park. It's a day off. I'm with my son Nate, and I'm pushing him on the swing set. And then my phone rings, and I notice it's a church member. I notice it's somebody, my boss at the conference, and I decide, you know what, I'm going to take this call. So here I am talking on the phone, and I'm pushing my son on the swing set, and I'm not really engaged with my son. Have you ever done that before? Maybe not the swing set, but does that story resonate? I've decided, you know what, it's okay to let that call go to voicemail. Because when it's family time, it's family time. When it's work time, it's work time. We need to focus on being in that moment. I love this quote from Stephanie Lahart. She says, give yourself permission to say no without feeling guilty, mean, or selfish. Anybody who gets upset or expects you to say yes all the time clearly doesn't have your best interest at heart. Always remember, you have a right to say no without having to what? Explain yourself. Because that's what we do, right? We feel like if we tell somebody no, we have to give a reason why. Let me tell you something, friends. No is a complete sentence. That's what I tell my kids. Right? You like that, huh? Put the tongue to the roof of your mouth and go, no. No. Right? It's a complete sentence. Be at peace with your, and then she says, be at peace with your decision. You see, here's what happens. Those of us in ministry, we can emotionally abandon our kids while doing ministry. I'm taking phone calls. I'm working on sermons, right? I'm counseling people. I'm creating an agenda. I've got business meeting, board meeting, an evangelistic series. I got this. All these things are happening. And I'm working in ministry. And my kid's in the background saying, Daddy, Daddy, I want to show you something. Dad, come here. I want to tell you something. And we say, hey, hold on, right? Close the door. I'll be with you in a minute. Let me tell you, if I can put my therapist hat on for a moment. When that scenario plays out over and over and over again in that child's mind, it sends them the message that they're not important to you. It's okay to not answer the phone. It's okay to say, I'll call you back. I've got something I've got to take care of. Now, don't misunderstand me. When you work, you work. But when you play, you play. And you make sure you don't mix the two together, right? But someone says, but yeah, if a church member asks me for something, I feel like I have to say yes or I'm gonna let them down. Let me tell you, if you always say yes, not only will you burn yourself out, but what will happen is you'll begin to feel resentment towards the people that you have been called to serve. Notice this next slide here. I love this quote here. If you face the choice between feeling guilt and resentment, choose the guilt every time. Do I need to read that again for you? If you face the choice between feeling guilt and resentment, choose the guilt every time. And any therapist worth their weight in salt will tell you this is absolutely gospel truth right here. In fact, as I'm talking about kids, let me add two more quick points here. They've done studies. This is kind of a side note. This one's free. They've done studies on what makes for successful kids. And the number one thing that will help your kids, ministry kids, but kids in general, the number one thing that will help your kids be successful in life is when you eat dinner as a family around the table. Did you know that? That's the number one thing studies have shown. Eat dinner as a family around the table. Now, there's another area I want to touch on, and that's money real quick. Because a lack of understanding on money will increase one's anxiety, and it can create a lot of depression. You see, the number one thing that couples fight about is, guess what? Money. Now, my wife is here with me tonight. And so, as God is my witness and before my loving wife, we have fought about many a things. But the one thing we have never argued about, not once, is guess what? Money. We have never, not once, fought when it comes to the subject of money. Now, when you think about how people these days are doing with their money, these stats represent those in your community. The average person has $20,000 in credit card debt and only about a third pay the minimum payment. These are the people coming to our evangelistic meetings, by the way. They're strapped financially. They're strapped financially. Do you realize that 31% of the population have less than $500 saved and 19% have $0 to cover emergencies? These are the people who call the church usually in winter and say, I can't afford my heating bill, right? You ever get those phone calls? I can't afford my electric bill. Can the church help me out? A study was recently done and it indicated that 65% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And this doesn't just include the average individual. This also includes pastors. Pastors also experience financial distress. Notice the quote up on the screen. It says, when pastors experience financial problems, they tend to rely on prayers and trust in God's provision. This behavior can lead to elusiveness, hoping for a miracle to happen, the problem to disappear, or imagining how things might turn out rather than confronting the situation and being proactive. You see, in ministry, it's easy for us to think that we're the only ones, but we're not. Every single person you come and encounter with, every single one of us in the room here tonight, every single person, we are all struggling right now in at least one area of our life. Did you know that? Nobody has it together. I used to struggle financially. I can remember when I was 21 years old, I was in the Navy, and I remember walking up to get on I was in Norfolk, Virginia. I'm walking up to get on the aircraft carrier. We're about to leave for a 6-month deployment, and I had less than $10 to my name. And I can remember how I felt inside, having less than $10 to my name. And I said to myself, man, I never want to feel this way again. And the reason is financial insecurity affects your mental health. I started off as a Bible worker working for the Northern California Conference back in the year 2000, and I made $1,000 a month. And my wife and I, we lived in a 16-foot, yes, that's right, 16-foot travel trailer parked behind the West Sacramento Church. This thing was literally so small, not to be too graphic, but you could sit on the toilet and reach over and open up the fridge and get, if you were thirsty. Seriously, it was that small. It was that small. I was invited to preach at a church Sabbath morning. I didn't have a suit. I went to the thrift store and I bought my very first suit. And it cost me more to get dry cleaned. Can you imagine that? More to get dry cleaned. And for like 8 years, and it was like an avocado, like green. It was probably really cool back in like the 70s, But that's all I could afford. My wife and I, we couldn't afford anything else. Now remember that feeling inside. And so about 20 years ago, I went on a personal finance journey. And through some series of events, my wife and I found out about this guy named Dave Ramsey. We started the baby steps. You see, the principles that I'm talking about tonight, this is not microwave evangelism. This is crock pot we're talking about. This isn't, I'm going to leave here tonight and tomorrow everything's, no. This is, I'm going to be intentional. I'm on a journey. I'm going to make my family, my mental health, my finances, my marriage. I don't want to be lonely. I'm going to make this a priority. And every journey starts with one step. So we started the financial journey. And we've been on this financial thing for like 20 years. And for those of you that are familiar with Dave Ramsey, by God's grace, we've done the hard work, and we're now on baby step 7. And let me tell you, to be in ministry and to be on baby step 7, that ain't easy. We have worked our butts off to get the baby step 7. But praise God, because we have 2 kids in Adventist education, and every August, we can pay their tuition in full. Because we've made the hard sacrifices, we've been intentional, we've thought crockpot, and we've done our hard work. Because let me tell you something, being debt-free, when you're in ministry and you owe no man except the Lord Jesus Christ, when you owe no man anything, it gives you a sense of freedom to work in ministry that's really hard to explain. But you have a freedom in ministry. It removes that stress. It actually brought my wife and I together because we had a common goal that we were going to work towards. and it made our marriage stronger. And it's actually doing something incredible for our family. Here's the final slide I want to close with tonight. I'm going to give you a formula. And this is the formula that you can apply to any area of your life. Because when it comes to success, what you'll discover is success leaves clues. You see, you find anybody who is successful in any major area of their life, and you'll find somebody who's been putting in the hard work. Successful people do consistently what other people do occasionally. And so here's the formula we follow. It's the compound effect formula. And the formula is simple. It's you make small, smart choices consistently over time, and what happens? You experience radical difference. It's important to understand this, friends, because all these areas we're talking about tonight, I mean, no one here, including myself, none of us have it all figured out. But I know that when I take care of me, I take care of you. When I take care of me, I take care of my church. When I take care of me, I take care of my family. It's hard being a pastor. It's hard being an elder. It's hard working in ministry. I mean, ministry itself is going to be tough. The devil's going to make sure of that. But when you're in ministry and you add on top of that anxiety, and you add on top of that depression, and you add on top of that loneliness, and you add on top of that financial insecurity, right? And you add on top of that a great controversy happening in your marriage. You like that great controversy? It's true. I've counseled with people that hate each other, and you're trying to work this thing out. Ministry's hard. But when you pile all these other things on top of that, it's a wonder that we're even able to get it done. When I take care of me, I take care of you. But you've got to understand your why. And I want to close with this thought here. My wife and I, we have a common why. And our why is our two kids, Nate and Bella. Bella's 16. She's at Music Fest at Walla Walla this weekend, and Nate's with his grandparents. But Nate and Bella, you see, my two kids are the first two kids on either side of our family, my wife's side and my side, the very first two kids, as far back as we know, that are growing up in a home where there's no drugs, no alcohol, no mental, physical, or sexual abuse. The reason I say that, I praise the Lord Jesus Christ, but the reason I say that is my wife and I, we have a common goal. And we said we want to change our family tree, right? That dysfunction, that financial dysfunction, that loneliness, that mental dysfunction, all of that, we said we want that to end with us. We want that to... So what is your why? When you think about your ministry, what is your why? Because if you know your why and it's fixated in your brain, you can withstand anyhow. You can run that marathon. You can fight for those things that you love, right? You can be in the moment. When you understand your why, you know that when it's family time, you're going to tell that person, no, I can't help you right now. I apologize, but it's not going to work out. Because you know your why. When it comes to your finances, you understand your why. When it comes to your marriage, you know your why. You know that when I get better, you get better. Amen. I'm going to put a couple discussion questions. You're welcome to take a snapshot of these, and if you want to think about them, ponder them tonight in your room, talk them over, you're welcome to do that. But I'm going to invite Myra to come on up, and I just want to thank each and every one of you for being here this weekend, and I'm looking forward to continuing our journey tomorrow as we get into some more practical things on evangelism and church growth. May God bless you.
Okay.